In this video, we're going to look at this machine, which is an IBM PS1 model 2133. The PS1 range was released by IBM in 1990 as a sort of cheap home and small business computer, as a sort of alternative to the much more expensive IBM PS2 range they already had. Unlike the PS2, which used fancy microchannel architecture and everything, the PS1 was targeted just to compete with all sort of typical IBM clones, so it was a fairly standard ISA-based machine. This model is a later one, which is the 2133, which was released in 1992, and was continued to be made until 1993, when they stopped producing these and moved over to doing the Aptiva line, which was very similar, just a different sort of name. This particular version here is a 2133 model 154. That means it came with 4 megs of RAM, a 170 megabyte hard drive, and a 25 MHz 486SX processor. So this was a sort of slightly lower end one. They went up to higher RAM, and you got ones with DX processors as well. But this one's pretty good, so we'll take a look at it. So as always, we'll take it apart, see what it's like inside, and then we'll fire it up and see it running. So on the front of the machine, you can see there's actually really nothing here, apart from the sort of hard drive LED, power LED, and a latching power switch. However, on the front there's this door which flips down, and that reveals a 3.5-inch floppy drive, and a drive bay where you could put a 5.25-inch floppy drive, or I suppose later on you could fit a CD-ROM drive in there as well. On the door over here, we have the IBM PS1 logo, which is visible both when the door is open and when it's closed. It's quite nice, it's sort of like a raised badge, so the text's all raised on it. On the sides of the machine there's nothing really to note, and on the back you can see there's a fairly small form factor power supply, with both IEC power in and out. This one's locked 200 to 240 volts, so you couldn't use that in multiple countries, there's no way to switch it. Over here we can then see we have a pair of PS2 ports, one for the keyboard, one for the mouse, a pair of 9-pin serial ports, 25-pin parallel port, standard VGA port, and then a pair of sort of game ports on an expansion card. As far as I can tell, this isn't original because there's no IBM part numbers on this card. All IBM components tend to have some sort of part number sticker stuck on them. On the back here we can also see the sticker, which says that the machine type is 2133 and the model number is 154. We can also see up here that it's manufactured by IBM in the UK in Greenock, which is only about 70 miles away from where I am in Edinburgh, so it's made pretty locally. Most of the IBM stuff I've sort of seen generally was made there, so I think all the UK stuff was made over there. So now let's take this machine apart. So this is really easy to open up. You simply flip that down, and there's like a little clicky latch under the top here. You press that in and pull the lid, and it just slides straight off. Slide it off and take it away. And yeah, it's just a big metal case. Although interestingly inside there's the date code, which is located here. So you can see that says 16th of March 1993. So this is very late in the PS1's sort of lifetime. And yep, now here we have the inside of the machine. So in the front we can see we just have the standard 3.5-inch floppy drive, space for the 5.25-inch drive here. There's where the power button clicks, so it just clicks through to a physical switch, and there's the LEDs that poke through the little light pipes on the front of the case. So here we can see the overall layout of the machine, which is very typical for a sort of LPX form factor machine like this. So over here we have the power supply, connects down with standard AT cables to the motherboard. Here we can see there's a spare cable for a 5.25-inch floppy drive if you were to install it, along with a Molex down there to connect it up. Hard drive's located under here, we'll get that out later. Floppy drive's here, then you've got 3 ISA slots on a riser card with one of them already populated. So what we'll now do is we'll actually take this apart and see, get down to the motherboard and see what it's all like. So the first thing we're going to do is take this expansion card out and then remove the riser and remove that whole assembly. So everything in this uses flat-headed screws, which is a bit strange, but if we just take that out, we can then get into the expansion card. So just take that out. Screws are a bit strange, they're sort of flathead but also sort of hexagonal, which is a bit weird. I don't know if that's some sort of way they do it in the factory. That comes out, we can pull this expansion card out. This is a quick shot game port card. Not really sure about these, never really seen these before. But yeah, it just seems to provide 2 game ports on it, because obviously there isn't anything on board, and there's no onboard sound where you would quite often have that on a sound card. So yeah, that's it there. It's fairly basic really. Not got any drivers for this, I've not actually used it, but yep, that's the game port card. So now we've got that out, we can now take this entire riser assembly out. So first of all, the floppy drive's attached to that. So we need to disconnect the floppy drive, so I'll unplug the power and data cables from it, like that. And next up there's a screw here and then two on the front of the case, so we'll take those out. Now those screws are out, we can lift this whole thing out. So it simply lifts up at the back and then the drive just slides out through the front of the case. And there you go, so that's that big bracket there. You can see there's the bit that holds that ISA riser in, it's just sort of slotted metal. And the floppy drive just sort of suspends off the end there. There's a sort of weird L-shaped thing here that goes round and then the drive fastened in there. So yeah, that's a floppy drive. It's really nothing special, just a standard 3.5-inch floppy drive. Obviously with an IBM part number on top of it there. But yeah, so now we can go further. So now that's out, we can just take the riser card out. It's not locked in at all, it just literally lifts out the slot. And that's it there. So you can see there's our ISA riser card. So it's got 3 16-bit ISA slots and a bunch of little electrolytic capacitors sitting in between. And that's it there. And on the back, nothing really that special. It's also got this sort of little copper strip here, which I'm guessing is maybe some sort of grounding contact, because that seems to sort of be where the case clamps it. So I wonder if that's some sort of grounding type thing. But yeah, the machine's now looking a lot more open to sort of see inside. The next thing I want to do is take out the hard drive. So the hard drive is mounted on this caddy that's locked in through the front and one screw on the side. So if we take the screw on the side out first, then we need to take the two on the front out and the whole hard drive will lift out. This caddy is also used to mount the 5.25-inch floppy drive or optical drive if you're using one. So you just have to take it out and put the screws through these bits that go through the bottom of the drive. Now those screws out, we can remove the drive. So we just lift it up from the front. Oh, sorry, so it's locked in at the bottom of the case. So what you need to do is you need to slide it back to disengage that little hook, and now the drive will just lift up like that. You see there's where it hooked into the bottom of the case with that metal there. And now what I'll do is just unplug the two cables from the back of the drive. And that is the hard drive in its caddy. So it's now just held in the caddy with 4 screws, so we'll take those out and actually see what the drive's like. So I've now unscrewed the hard drive from the back bracket, and here it is. So it's an IBM branded drive. You can see there's a model, which is a WDA L160. This is a 170 gig drive. Of course, in true hard drive fashion, it doesn't actually say the capacity on it, which is one of my big gripes, but then there's some more information about the part number. Loads of sort of warranty seals all over it. Then on the back, we can see we have a standard IDE connector, it's a normal IDE drive, and a Molex connector for power, along with this sort of 3-pin connector here. Not sure what that is. Ground 12 and 5 volt there. Don't know if that's some sort of either power input that's not the Molex, some sort of power output, or I don't know, or something for diagnostics, but yeah, it's got that there. You see on the bottom, it's got loads of components on it, way more than a sort of modern drive would have. And then down here we can see we have some jumpers. Just a single jumper on, yeah, there's 2 jumpers there. Of course not labelled, so you don't really know what they're for, but they'll probably be, master slave, maybe capacity limit, stuff like that. Also over here, there is a date code, so that is 1992. So hard drive from 1992, which does sort of add up roughly. I mean, machines made 93, hard drives tend to sit around a wee while before they go in machines. And yet, because it's an IBM branded drive, it's all IBM chips on it as well. So yeah, that's a hard drive. So now the hard drive's removed, we can see a lot more of the inside of the machine, and we can delve a lot deeper. So here's a floppy ribbon cable, which goes to both the 3.5-inch drive and the 5.25, which would be optional. So we can take that one out first. That pulls out. Next we have the IDE ribbon cable. We've got one that would go up to the hard drive here, and then a sort of extra one that just sat there. You could probably use that for a second hard drive or for CD-ROM. I don't know if the motherboard would support CD-ROM or even maybe need an add-on card for it, but yep, that comes out. And yep, all you've now got is the 3 Molex cables and the power supply, so no real expansion beyond the sort of 3 drives that would be available with this. And yet, and there's AT connections to the motherboard. So now we can see the board in all its glory. So here's the motherboard, which is a sort of standard LPX board. Power supply connects over here. You have connections to the drives there, just one ID channel on this, and then the CMOS battery. Then here's a large connector that would go to the ISA riser. Over here we can see the 2 CPU sockets. This one's obviously populated with the actual CPU, and this one is left for an 80487SX. So because this has the 486SX processor, the processor doesn't include a floating point unit. The DX ones did though, so you wouldn't need that if you had a DX. But if you had an SX and you wanted a floating point unit, you could buy the 487 chip that you put in here, and that would handle that. Now, interestingly, the 487 was actually a full-blown 486 DX, but so when you put it in, it just disabled the main 486 SX and did everything, but it also only worked if there was a 486 fitted. So I'm not sure what the point of it was. Like, why would you buy that rather than just buying a DX2 and replacing your normal chip? I wonder if they were cheaper to buy a 487 rather than, buying a whole 486 like DX. Bit of a strange idea. But yep, the 486 SX is under here. So it's got this heatsink on it that's held on with like thermal cement, so that's not going to come off. But we can probably pull the chip out the board. There's no locking mechanism on these, they are just literally pushed into a socket, but that pops up. And there it is. So there's the thermal cement, so we're not going to be able to take the heatsink off without sort of probably causing a massive mess and then not getting it back on. But you can see on the bottom there's all the gold pins. And there's sort of die in the middle. All sort of gold covered, and it's a ceramic chip, so it's sort of old, nice old-fashioned ceramic. So yeah, it's a shame we can't get the heatsink off, but yeah. It's also interesting because the 25MHz SX didn't really need a heatsink. These could easily run without cooling. But yeah, I mean, they're quite often available in sort of just surface mount packages like these. But yeah, they've also just put a heatsink on just for additional cooling, really. I mean, doesn't really need it, but it's also not expensive to put that on. So now we can fit this back, being very careful about the keying because all you have to go on is that this has a slightly cut out corner. The other corners are also slightly rounded, just not as rounded. So you have to be very careful. So that corner there goes into this corner here because that's where we've got the little dot on the inside. So that's one that's cut off. Definitely, yep, just double checking that. Yep, and then that can go in there. And unlike modern boards that are zero insertion force, this one is very much insertion force, it should be called. It takes quite a bit of force to put that back in. But yeah, that's it installed. So now down here we can see a closer look at that area. And over here there's a couple of sort of bodge wires put in. So this is giving me flashback to my previous video of the PS2 L40SX. Obviously, way less bodge wires here, but there's still a couple just going in there. There's also this sort of large area here that would have been for some other surface mount chip. No idea what that would have been for. I mean, it looks similar to like what you'd have like an actual CPU in. So I'm not sure if that was where they potentially have a surface mounted 486 rather than a socketed one. Or I don't know. But yeah, it's got that space there. So now looking at this corner of the board, we can again see there's the riser card slot, as well as these two IBM branded ROM chips. So these will probably be the BIOS. Early sort of PS1 machines had IBM Basic on board, and some even had the like DOS in the ROM chips, whereas this one just has standard BIOS on these. Interesting, there's different date codes on each chip, but yep, that's two ROM chips there, all socketed, so you could just replace them if you needed to, as well as sort of model number or part number for this motherboard. Over here we can see the Tseng Labs ET4000AX graphics accelerator chip. This is a fairly standard ISA based graphics accelerator from machines used in many machines like this. It was also available on add-on cards, but yep, that's just the standard onboard solution they have there. Over here we can see that the 4 megs of RAM is made up of 4 1 meg SIMs. These are fairly easy to get out, just pop that down, slide the SIM out, and that just pops out the slot like that. You can see it there, it's got the IBM part number on the back, because obviously it's the official IBM part. And on the other side, you can see there are just 3 chips there. Interestingly, even they're IBM branded, so it even has like IBM's own memory. So yeah, you've got 4 of those, that's the RAM in this machine. Just goes back in, just sort of slots in, making sure I do it right, and slides up, and that's the RAM now reinstalled. Another interesting thing with this motherboard is the number of unpopulated headers down here. So here we can see the headers for the power and hard drive LEDs, but there's also one here for a key lock, one here for a reset switch, one here for a turbo LED, and one for a turbo switch. Interestingly, the reset headers are actually active. If you short those, the machine will actually reset, and there's 5 volts across that. However, the turbo switch and key lock don't seem to be wired up because there's no voltage across those, and I'd assume since reset uses a voltage to do the sensing of the switch, I imagine the turbo and key lock should do that as well. There's also a couple of unpopulated spaces here for resistors, so I'm guessing that just isn't implemented on this machine. But yeah, it is quite cool that the reset switch sort of header does actually do something, they just haven't put it on the case. And down here we can also see the standard post speaker soldered to the motherboard. So now let's reassemble this machine and fire it up and see it running. So I now have the machine hooked up to a standard monitor, keyboard and mouse, and I'll take a look at it running. But the first thing we'll look at is the keyboard. So this is the original keyboard that would have shipped with the PS1. It didn't ship with this one, I bought it separately, but this is the keyboard. So this is an IBM Model M2. So you've probably heard of the IBM Model M, the big massive buckling spring keyboard that's fairly famous. I've actually got a couple of them, but they're buried, so I can't really go and get one out. Well, this was the cheaper version. So this is a slightly cheaper, much smaller version of the Model M. So whereas the Model M had a lot of, really thick plastic casing with big metal plates inside it, this thing's entirely plastic, but it's still a buckling spring keyboard. So yeah, that's the keyboard there. So you can see on the top of it there, it's much smaller than a normal Model M. The Model M's are significantly heavier and much larger. But you can see, yeah, it's got a standard sort of key layout. IBM logo and LEDs up there. The key caps aren't easily removable like they are on the Model M, but yeah, they're still there. If you look on the bottom, we can see there's information there. So this is a later model, so it's made by Lexmark. So it's from 1994. This is after the sort of outsourced production. But yeah, that's it there. These are actually very easy to work on. Like the Model M, you've got to sort of, to get to the spring, you've got to basically break off plastic clips and replace them with bolts. Whereas this one, it's all just one thing. So you undo the two screws here, which are interesting sort of square heads, but you undo those. The top just lifts off, and just all the springs fall out, and you can just rearrange them all. So it's quite an interesting keyboard. I might do like a video where I take this apart because it's quite easy to work on, and it does sort of show how the buckling spring mechanism works. So yeah, that's the keyboard. It's not as nice to type on as a Model M, but it's not too bad. The only issue is I think on this one, because it's old, some of the keys are a bit uneven, so some feel a bit different, spring a little differently to the other ones. But yeah, it's not too bad. I actually replaced some of the springs in this because some were completely dead. You can still buy the springs and little plates from Unicomp, so I bought a few of those and fitted them. Yeah, it's a pretty nice keyboard though. I then got the sort of standard IBM mouse. I don't think this is what would have shipped to the PS1. This is slightly newer. I'm guessing this is probably would have probably shipped with an Aptiva or something. The PS1 sort of had a couple of different mice. They had one that looked fairly similar to this, and then the other ones seemed to just come with a standard mouse that was used in IBM PS2, sort of standard one with two very distinct buttons on top. The other really cool thing with this is that it came with the original software install. That's cool enough, but what was also really good is the original software install lets you create recovery media. So I was actually able to use that to create this big stack of I think 11 floppies this is? Yeah, 11 floppies, which you can use to restore the machine back to factory settings. So I did that because I had loads of stuff from the previous owner on it, loads of software and things, and it was a bit cluttered up. So I thought, well, I'll make these disks and I'll restore it. So this is now running effectively a clean factory image. That's pretty cool because the original, one of the main things about the PS1 is it was a sort of thing you could take out the box, plug it in, switch it on, and it would work. So you can see how it's all sort of set up and how it's designed to be easy to use. Original PS1s would have shipped with a sort of DOS, just with standard DOS, and then a sort of shell on top to be easy to use. Whereas this one's a standard, MS-DOS machine with Windows 3.1. So now let's fire it up. So press power button in. So now you can see it's doing the RAM count where it's at 3.7 megs. And it'll now continue to boot into DOS. Now what you're seeing here looks just like a sort of splash screen. It just sort of sits for a few seconds. But I looked in the autoexec.bat file, and this is actually an executable called HWTest. So what I'm guessing is when it actually starts up, when it displays that screen, it's actually running a simple sort of hardware test, check the machine's okay. It also seems to run a sort of antivirus program at the same time. That was booting into Windows 3.1. And because this is factory install, you'll see the program manager will very quickly flash up, but then it'll disappear. And you get the simple welcome screen. So this is part of the thing to make it easy to use. You can either just start the program manager, at which point you can hit OK to just go to it, or press always and that'll get rid of this welcome message. Or what you can do is hit this thing to learn about your PS1 computer. And the whole thing, you can see, it's designed for somebody who's never used a computer before. So I mean, obviously you can use the mouse, but it also says things like press the number 1. So if I want to if I've never even used a mouse before, I can still see the words press the number 1 and probably figure out that means to press 1 on the keyboard. Then from here it shows all different things, so Windows lessons, tells you how to, page down, page up, shows you all these keys. And it's just a standard very early tutorial, how to use a mouse. All that sort of, click, how you can double click and things. It's quite interesting because this used to be fairly common. You'd get a sort of, especially if you're buying a sort of machines designed for home use, the sort of compacts and the gateway type sort of machines, Packard Bell, they all included sort of very easy tutorials built into them to get people used to it. Whereas nowadays it's sort of just implied that if you're buying a computer, you can probably either know how to work it or you can figure it out very quickly. So they don't really have this sort of level of tutorial on how to use it. But yeah, it's quite cool. There's also software descriptions, which tells you about the software that's bundled, because there's a few bits of software. So it tells you, see the different software that's installed, so you can see Microsoft Windows. It tells you what Windows is. Oh, it features software called Microsoft Windows. So it tells you how it all works. You go through different features built into Windows. You then read about Microsoft Works, which is also included. And it tells you how the different components of that works. So this is quite interesting. It's a very nice sort of just simple tutorial for people who have taken it out of the box, potentially never used a computer before, or potentially even just used, DOS or something before. They can very quickly figure out how this all works. And then of course, exit to Program Manager, and we're back in Program Manager. So this is a completely clean install, so it even starts up with the windows all placed like this, which is how it would have been when they were new. So here's the PS1. So there's obviously not any additional software on this right now, so I'm not going to demonstrate it too much. I have previously had stuff. I've had like Wolfenstein 3D and Doom sort of installed on this. Had to upgrade the RAM for those, but yep, it did run those games reasonably well. But yeah, this is just a completely clean install. So obviously got Microsoft Works we can look at. Version 2.0A. Then we go in, start Works now, word processor. Relatively snappy machine. And there's, the early copy of Microsoft Works installed. And it's licensed to IBM PS1 customer. Just standard Windows programs here, so you've got the old version of Paintbrush that would have come with Windows. It's all got that included. You can also take a look at About Windows, or About Program Manager, so you see there again, it has 10 megs of RAM? Okay, that must be virtual memory then, because I've definitely not got 10 megs of RAM. Although I did upgrade it to 10 megs at one point, and maybe it's got confused. I have no idea, there must be something to do with virtual memory. But yep, again licensed to IBM PS1 customer. Over here we can see there's more stuff. So there's a PS1 tutorial, that's the thing we're just in. Why did I reopen that? That was stupid. Windows tutorial, I think that's again the Windows. It's slightly different actually. Oh, very state-of-the-art PowerPoint here. If you want to learn how to use the mouse or need to brush up on your mouse skills, press M. This is a different sort of tutorial, but it's how to use a mouse. Type R or L. Yeah, exit that gets me out. Yes. Cool. Just more tutorials and things. This is more the sort of standard PS1 software. So you can see here you've got the PS1 Fitness, which is a sort of control panel thing. This is quite cool. So you can use that to set the date and time. This displays system information. So we can see here that it's a 486SX, 25 MHz, 4 megs of RAM, VGA graphics. All this can do SVGA. I think it's just not set up for that or whatever. 1.4 meg floppy, 171 meg hard drive, and then the various COM ports and DOS version 5, Windows 3.1. Display select you can configure. So yeah, it's dropped down to 640 by 480. I previously have had it at 256 colours, 800 by 600. So I could probably change that. It's not done it. I don't know if it maybe tries to detect the monitor, but yeah, that's what it is available to do those resolutions. You can create the PS1 recovery disks, which I'm going to cancel out of. You can use this to create the backup recovery floppies and restore it from them and things like that. That'll reset Windows. Virus checking. Check for viruses on drive C. Oh, it's, intense virus checking here. Well, that was a silly thing to do now, I've got to wait for it. Oh well, I'll be back in a minute. Okay, well after waiting a few minutes there for it to pointlessly check for viruses, we can now know it's not got any viruses, so that's good for peace of mind, I suppose. And yep, you can tell it to start up, do a virus scan when it starts as well, which is enabled. Yeah, you got the system configuration editor, don't know what that is. This just opens a bunch of, basically all the batch files you can see here. Fairly standard. So you just use that to easily edit those, and that'll set you to a DOS prompt. You've also got this thing that says your software. This just sort of, it's really just a file browser for executables. It's nothing really fancy. Like it's purely like, it's like File Manager. It just only shows things you can, like executables, rather than listing all the files in the system. So I suppose it's easier in that respect, but you can do that with File Manager. Obviously you've now got File Manager, so you can use that to browse the file system. Very standard. DOS prompt will take you to a DOS prompt again. Like that. So type exit, takes us back to Windows. And yeah, that's really it. I mean, you've got Solitaire installed if you wanted to play that. Which does work, I'm terrible at Solitaire, but yep, it does do that sort of thing. Get out of that. And yeah, so that's a sort of look at Windows 3.1. Now, it's not got anything installed, so it's a bit limited. But yeah, I mean, it is just normal Windows 3.1, so it's not really anything specific to this machine. However, if we close Windows, so if we exit Windows, it doesn't just dump us straight back to DOS. In the whole sort of easy to use thing, it actually gives us this PS1 menu, which interestingly has a mouse. So you can actually use this. So you can use the arrow keys or the mouse. So you can say you want to go back to Windows, which will start Windows again. You can go to a DOS prompt, so that's just DOS prompt. And again, it says, when ready to return to the PS1 menu, type exit. So it guides you around it quite nicely. And we're back at the PS1 menu. You can also go to the DOS shell, which should be installed. And there you go, you can get the DOS shell, so slightly more graphical way of using DOS. So not quite Windows obviously, but yep, you get the IBM DOS shell. Yeah, actually this is not the standard DOS shell, this is actually a sort of custom IBM thing. Interesting. Yeah, you can say yeah, confirm on deleting things. So yeah, you've got this as well. Ooh, IBM DOS QBasic, is that installed? Ooh, that's cool. So yeah, it's even got QBasic installed. So yeah, you could play a bit with that if you wanted. So we can now exit out of this. So just file, exit. And that'll take us back into the DOS shell. From here we can just exit that again, which takes us back to the PS1 menu. And from here we can just turn the machine off. If you press F1 here as well, it gives you a bit more text and actually says like, your PS1 can now be safely turned off. So that's quite nice. And yep, so we press power button in, machine will turn off. There you have it. That was a look at the IBM PS1 Model 2133. So yeah, thank you very much for watching.